Overwatch 2 is right around the corner, and in anticipation, everyone has been looking back at all the best Overwatch 1 matches we had. Custa has been rewatching many of the most popular games. I think he called it History of Overwatch on his Twitch channel and YouTube. And the official Overwatch League Twitter made a poll for fans to vote on their favorite match. I personally very much disagreed with the results of those polls, so I wanted to give my take on it here. So first of all, one of the big problems I had with it is that there are 2 whole years of Overwatch esports before OWL Season 1 started that should have been included, and also there have been many great contenders matches that were even better than OWL matches, so we should discuss those as well. OWL didn't pick any games for 2016, and honestly I don't really blame them for that. For every other year I've picked at least 4 games, and with a couple honorable mentions, but there's really only one game that people remember from 2016, and that's Envious versus Afrika Freaks Blue in Apex Season 1 Finals. It's fine. It's not great by today's standards, but Envious was a very popular team at the time, and it marks the last time that NA was better than Korea in this game. OWL didn't pick any games for 2017, and I think that is just criminal. This was the most exciting era of Overwatch esports in my opinion, as the talent really started to level up, and I found the tournament circuit to be a much more engaging format than the regular season format of the league. My first pick for this era would be Lunatic High versus Runaway in the Apex Season 2 Finals. It's a 7-map series between 2 very legendary teams. One of the big storylines for this was Hacksaw versus Who Are You on the Genji. Who is the best Genji in Korea? But I think the real difference maker in the series, it comes down to Miro Zumba, the tanks of Lunatic High, and Jaehong and Toby, the supports of Lunatic High. They're just a little bit better than their counterparts on Runaway, and that's what edges out the series for them. Lunatic High players go on to become Seoul Dynasty, and some of these Runaway players end up on Vancouver Titans later, if you only watched OWL. Now my next pick would be Lunatic High versus Kongdu Panthera in the Apex Season 3 Finals. This is possibly the greatest match of Overwatch ever. This one went to 9 maps because in this format, a draw is settled by playing 1 round of Lijiang Control Center. It sounds confusing, but it'll make sense if you watch the game. Lunatic High defend their crown and become back-to-back champions, but only just barely. Most of Kongdu Panthera's players got scattered around, but they did mostly all make it to OWL. My third pick would be GC Busan versus Runaway in the Apex Season 4 Finals. This is a 7-map slugfest, and this is where Prophet made a name for himself. You should know him from the London Spitfire and then later the Seoul Dynasty. Before this game, Prophet pretty much only played Tracer in official matches, but he switches to the Genji mid-series to keep up with Hacksaw. Runaway is becoming closer and closer to becoming that Vancouver Titans roster. They have picked up a few more of those players, and GC Busan mostly moved on to London Spitfire. My fourth pick would be USA versus South Korea in the World Cup 2017 semifinals, and this is where Flower really popped off. USA were confident that they were going to win this, but Flower absolutely shut them down and proved to the international audience that South Korea was the best region in the world. I would like to give an honorable mention real quick to Miraculous Youngsters versus Lunatic High in the Seoul Cup semifinals. The number 1 team in China taking on the number 1 team in Korea. Lunatic High took this one in a reverse sweep. We get glimpses of Leave, Late Young, and their coach RUI, who later go with the Chengdu Hunters. 2018, for OWL Season 1, I actually mostly agree with the matches that they picked for the poll. Dynasty versus Fuel in Stage 1, Spitfire versus NYXL in the Stage 1 Finals, and Uprising versus Spitfire in Stage 3. Those were all great matches. I actually think some people underrate the Spitfire Stage 1 win because they forget that because of a strange scheduling choice, London plays a regular season game against NYXL, loses 3-2, and then they qualify for the stage playoffs still, play against Houston, beat them 3-1, and then play NYXL again and reverse sweep them after 14 maps in one day. I actually love this game. It's amazing story. I don't know how the players had the stamina to play that much Overwatch on stage in one day. I actually don't like the other match that they picked. It was NYXL versus Philadelphia Fusion in the playoffs. I don't think NYXL put up a good enough fight to say that that was a good game. I would instead like to replace it with Runaway versus Kongdu Panthera in South Korean Contenders Season 2 Finals. It's an 8-map series where Runaway wins their first finals in Overwatch history, and they become more than just a plucky group of underdogs, and this is where they sort of transition into becoming the prestigious Tier 2 org that they were later in Overwatch's life cycle. This finally is the Runaway roster that you will recognize that became Vancouver Titans, and you should recognize most of the Kongdu Panthera players from either Shanghai Dragons or LA Gladiators. Spitfire versus NYXL won the Twitter poll, and I agree with that. Moving on to 2019, or Owl Season 2, I once again mostly agree with Owl's choices here. Titans versus Hunters in Stage 1 is a legendary match for the Meng Reinhardt that came out of nowhere.
Disgusting, man. It was disgusting. I've never seen a player literally fucking move to the next Pokemon evolution, like where he's stuck in, he literally has a single, like he only has a certain moveset. He's Orisa, Hammond. That's his moveset. That's all he's got. And then they fucking hit him with the rare candies. You see it fucking glow for a bit. It pops out. It's a Meng. Second generation. He can play Reinhardt now. It's fucking crazy.
Shock vs Titans in the Stage 1 Finals is peak GOATS gameplay, and Shock vs Dragons in the Stage 3 Finals is the true death of GOATS. The fourth game that they picked was the Rain versus the Shock in the playoffs, but I don't really think it deserves to be here as much as the other three, and I would vote to replace it with London Spitfire versus the Shanghai Dragons in the play-ins. People don't bring up this match very much, but oh my, it is a banger. Roll Lock just got implemented, so this is 2-2-2, and these are two great teams that were held back by GOATS because they were really built around their DPS players, so they got a huge boost late in the season. Ding was uncontested as the best fair in the league at this time, and London went from dominating to almost losing to pulling back the series at the last possible moment. This is a very tense game that'll leave you on the edge of your seat all the way down to the last map. I got two honorable mentions for 2019, Runaway versus Element Mystic in Contenders The Gauntlet, the winners final, and the Dragons' first franchise win over Boston Uprising.
Expire. They will be able to finish them off. There you go. Gonna get it. Just a couple more percent to go. Let them have it, Boston. Axiom, top of the primal range, but it does not matter. Ladies and gentlemen, history has been made. The Shanghai Dragons, on the 43rd attempt out, managed to pick up their first match victory.
Dragons vs Shock in the Stage 3 Finals actually won the fan poll, but I disagree with that. Even though the scoreline is close, the individual maps are not. It's kind of a stomp on one map and then a stomp the other way on the next. I think that Titans vs Shock was a way more intense series, and they built a rivalry that would last the whole season. In 2020, or Owl Season 3, I actually think they picked the right games from the season. Uprising vs Outlaws.
Okay. Because the screen's gone black now, like this. Expecting some kind of big reveal here. And that's the graphic.
Welcome to the Toilet Bowl 2020 Overwatch League.
Dynasty versus Shanghai Dragons in the May Melee final. The
Fleder now moving over onto the Widowmaker, taking the clutch into his own hands. The headshot after headshot after headshot. I do not believe what we have just witnessed.
Eternal versus the Fusion in the Summer Showdown final.
Only a couple of players left remaining. EQO's gonna come up huge right now. Everyone is weak. EQO with the blade, pulls it through, builds it up. Will it be enough? 1 kill, 2 kill. Are you kidding me? EQO now finds it with the third. And now it is overtime. Exy moving over to the Tracer to try and deny, but EQO!
And the Justice versus the Shock in the playoffs. The Dynasty versus the Dragons won the Twitter poll, but I think a lot of people would agree with me in saying that the Eternal versus the Fusion was robbed here. It was a great game because we got to see Genji for the first time in years. 2021, or Owl Season 4, the most recent season of Owl. I think this was the biggest miss that Owl had. They picked the Outlaws versus the Shock, the Fuel versus the Dragons in the June Joust finals, the Shock versus the Gladiators, and the Gladiators versus the Hunters. I get that the Shock, the Glads, and the Outlaws all have huge fan bases, so that's why they were included so much, but the Outlaws versus the Shock and the Shock versus the Gladiators are not great matches in my opinion. Outlaws versus Shock is from the May Melee, and I think the finals of that tournament, Fuel versus Dragons, was miles better, but I'd understand if you didn't want 2 Fuels versus Dragons on the list, so I'd go with Mayhem versus Dragons in the semifinals. I have less of a problem with Shock vs Glads, but it still has too much Orisa for my taste. Personally, I would go with Fuel versus Justice in the Summer Showdown knockouts, as it features a great maiden tank showdown on Rhine and Winston. Fuel versus Dragons in the June Joust finals won the fan poll, but personally I like the May Melee finals match between these two teams better because it is quite literally the best game of Winston Dive that has ever been played. Owl picked the highest voted match from each year and then had the fans vote on that, leaving Dragons vs Shock from Season 3 as the winner. I think this method is kinda unfair. It doesn't really give you the full picture as each year was not equal in quality. So this is my top 10. It was very difficult to choose and narrow it all the way down to number 1, but in the end, I'm giving number 1 to the Titans versus the Shock Stage 1 finals in Season 2 because it was 2 very good teams in a good meta, and it was super close on every point of the map, and it also has one of the best storylines, as no one thought a Contenders team could ever be Owl level, and then Runaway turns into Vancouver Titans, and they win the first stage. I also want to take one last opportunity to dunk on Philly fans because I think that Eternal versus Fusion is the most overrated match of all time. It's still in 10th, but I know a lot of people would put it at number 1. Sure, it's a close game, and the Genji is fun. I like seeing Genji too, but it's still double shield with Bat Brig. Genji is the strongest he's ever been, and he still gets dunked on if you misplay it by like a millimeter. You just get rocked, shield bashed, they lamp your blade. It's just ridiculous. If you want to watch good Genji, go back to Season 1 or Apex. Anyways, if your favorite match somehow was not on this list, please leave it in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in Overwatch 2.